The atmosphere was destroying her, until a human forged the unthinkable. Lyra coughed as the thick, poisonous air clawed at her lungs. Every breath burned like fire, and even her protective mask could only filter so much. She pressed forward, dragging her worn suit through the endless haze that had become her home. The city of Violia, once alive with colors and sounds, now lay under a sickly green sky, its buildings corroded and hollowed by years of acidic storms. The air was killing everything, plants, animals, and even the people who had called this planet home for generations. Her hands trembled as she adjusted the controls of her atmospheric analyzer. The numbers flickered across the screen, each reading worse than the last. Oxygen levels had plummeted, toxic gases had risen to dangerous peaks, and storms that once came once a season now raged daily. Lyra had spent her life studying the planet, designing systems to cleanse and repair the atmosphere, but every solution had failed. It seemed as if Violia itself was determined to die. She paused near the edge of a crumbling tower, her suit shielding her from the acidic rain that hissed on contact. Her vision blurred through the mask's fogged visor. "There has to be a way," she whispered to herself. Her voice was hoarse, but determination sharpened her thoughts. The government had begun pressuring her to evacuate, to leave the dying world and abandon her people. But Lyra could not. Every instinct, every memory, every heartbeat screamed at her that leaving meant certain death for Violia. She forced herself onward, moving carefully across the jagged ruins of what had once been a marketplace. She could remember the laughter that had filled this place, the bright fabrics of merchant stalls, and the smell of fresh food. Now it was all ash and corrosion, the silence broken only by the wind that carried acid-laden particles through the empty streets. Lyra's heart ached, but she could not give in. Not yet. A sudden flash in the sky drew her gaze upward. She squinted, trying to focus through the haze. At first, she thought it was lightning, but the shape was too deliberate, too smooth. A small ship, sleek and unlike anything she had seen, descended slowly from the sky, cutting through the poisonous clouds as if the storm bent around it. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. Humans did not often visit Violia. In fact, few had ever seen one descend so boldly into the deadly atmosphere. Her first reaction was caution. Humans were unpredictable. Their technology was advanced, yes, but their motives were often unclear. And yet something inside her stirred: hope. Could this human, whoever they were, offer a solution to the problem that had haunted her for years? The ship landed with a soft hum, kicking up clouds of acidic dust that hissed against Lyra's suit. She approached carefully, scanning the area for traps or signs of danger. A hatch opened and a figure stepped out. He was tall, with a confident posture that suggested he belonged to the stars rather than the broken streets of Violia. His suit was different, sleek, designed for extremes and seemingly unaffected by the corrosive air. Lyra felt a strange mix of fear and fascination. "Are you safe?" she called, her voice echoing against the hollowed buildings. The human looked up, scanning the surroundings with sharp, intelligent eyes. "I will be," he replied. His voice carried an unusual calmness, as if nothing could surprise him, even standing on a planet that was actively trying to kill them. "And you?" Lyra hesitated. She had trained herself to trust no one, not even the few humans who occasionally passed through Violia's orbit. But something about him seemed different. Perhaps it was his calm confidence or the way he assessed danger without fear. She nodded slowly. "I survive," she said, though the words felt hollow. Survival here was a fragile thread. "I am Ethan," he said, offering a small gesture that could have been a greeting. "I study planets like yours. I think I can help." Lyra's brow furrowed. Help. That word carried weight, but in a world where hope had nearly vanished, even a whisper of help was enough to stir her curiosity. "How?" she asked cautiously, taking a step closer. Ethan gestured toward the ruined city. "Your atmosphere is collapsing." "I've studied similar cases in other systems. It's extreme, but not impossible. With your knowledge of Violia and my technology, I believe we can stabilize it." Lyra's heart pounded. Could it be true? Could a human, someone from a distant world, really hold the key to saving her people? Yet, instinct warned her not to trust easily. Humans were known for boldness, sometimes reckless boldness, and she had little room for mistakes. "Your methods?" she asked. "They're untested here. One wrong calculation and you could kill more than the storm has." Ethan smiled faintly, undeterred. "I know the risks, but I also know this: waiting will destroy everything. You cannot solve this alone, and I cannot do it without you." Lyra studied him, weighing the impossible choice. She had spent years failing, watching the world around her crumble, and yet here was a human offering a solution. Not a promise, not a guarantee, but a plan. Risky, yes, but a plan nonetheless. And perhaps that was what made it worth taking. Very well, she said finally, the weight of her decision settling on her shoulders. We try it your way. Ethan's eyes lit up with quiet satisfaction. Then we start immediately. The two of them moved to the heart of the city, where Lyra's lab still functioned, albeit barely. Machines sputtered, alarms rang occasionally, and the smell of burning circuits mingled with the acidic air. Ethan knelt, examining a complex array of sensors and monitors. He touched the panels, his fingers moving with an intuitive understanding that made Lyra's head spin. You adapt fast, she muttered, watching him manipulate the devices with ease. It's what humans do, Ethan replied. We see a problem and find a way no matter the cost. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but we try. Lyra felt a spark of something unfamiliar, admiration, perhaps even hope. For the first time in years, she saw a possibility, a way forward that didn't involve evacuation or despair. Together, they could attempt what had seemed unthinkable, reclaiming the planet from the deadly atmosphere that threatened to destroy everything. Hours passed, the storm outside growing fiercer, yet inside the lab, the pair worked tirelessly. Lyra explained the delicate balance of gases, the chemical reactions that had once supported life, and the points where the atmosphere had begun to fail. Ethan absorbed everything, occasionally asking questions that challenged her assumptions, making her rethink methods that she had believed were final. By nightfall, they had devised a preliminary strategy. It was bold, risky, and untested, but it was something. The storm outside raged against the city, but inside there was a fragile warmth of determination. Lyra could feel it deep in her chest, the first real hope in years. Yet the danger was far from over. The planet would not yield easily. Every step would be a battle against the corrosive air, against the failing infrastructure, and against the limits of human and alien ingenuity combined. But for now, Lyra allowed herself a moment to breathe. Through the mask, yes, but with a mind filled with possibility rather than fear. The human beside her worked silently, the steady hum of his equipment blending with the faint crackle of the storm outside. Lyra watched him for a moment, realizing that what made humans extraordinary was not just their technology, but their will, their refusal to surrender even when faced with impossibility. For the first time, she imagined a future where Violia could survive. And maybe, just maybe, it was because of him, this human who had landed uninvited into her dying world, carrying the unthinkable in his hands. As the night deepened, Lyra felt a cautious optimism stir. The storm still raged, the air still burned, and the planet was far from healed. But for the first time in years, she did not feel alone. There was a partner in this battle, someone whose ingenuity, courage, and determination might just tip the balance. Tomorrow, they would begin the real work, the work of forging hope in a world that had almost forgotten how to breathe. The morning sun struggled to pierce through the thick, greenish haze that clung to the sky. Lyra adjusted her suit once more, checking the seals and filters. She could feel the sting of the toxic air even through the reinforced layers. Yet for the first time in years, her thoughts were not only of survival, they were of a plan, and the strange human beside her was the key to making it work. Ethan moved with ease among the wreckage of Lyra's lab, inspecting her instruments with a curious eye. He touched switches, turned dials, and even rewired some of the older machines with parts from his ship. The speed and confidence of his work left Lyra both impressed and unsettled. She had spent a lifetime mastering these systems, yet this human adapted to them as if he had known them all his life. Your readings from the atmosphere are all over the place, Ethan said, crouching beside a corroded sensor. But there is a pattern. It fluctuates too quickly for natural causes. Something is destabilizing the chemical balance faster than I would expect. Lyra frowned. Yes, the planet is dying. Every year the balance slips further. We used to think it was just climate cycles, but it is more than that. The air itself is changing. Ethan nodded, jotting notes on a small digital pad. Then we need to work fast. I can bring in devices to stabilize the composition, but the calculations have to be precise. If we make one small mistake, the reaction could backfire. Lyra's stomach tightened at the thought. She had seen entire experiments fail in minutes, destroying equipment and nearly killing their operators. but the desperation that had built over years of watching her world crumble gave her courage. "Then we do it together," she said, determination firm in her voice. "I know the planet's chemistry, you know how to build the machines." Ethan smiled faintly. "Then let's get to work." They began with the basic readings, scanning the atmosphere over the ruins of the city. Lyra explained the corrosive effects of the toxins, pointing out areas where the air was so dense with harmful compounds that not even the strongest suits could protect for long. Ethan listened carefully, asking questions and noting every detail. "The problem," he said after some time, "is that these toxins are being regenerated faster than natural cycles allow. The air isn't just polluted, it's self-reinforcing. Whatever we do has to stop the reaction completely or slow it to a manageable level." Lyra nodded. "That is why all previous attempts failed. No one tried to stabilize the chemical reactions directly. They only filtered the air, a temporary fix at best." Ethan's eyes lit up. "Then we'll target the reaction itself. I have equipment that can break down the toxins and rebuild the atmosphere molecule by molecule. It's risky, but it can work, if we calculate the flow correctly." Lyra felt a mix of fear and excitement. Humans always took risks that others would avoid. It was reckless, yes, but sometimes that recklessness carried results that careful planning could never achieve. "Where do we start?" she asked. He gestured toward the open field outside the lab. "We need a test site, something controlled. We cannot risk the city until we know the machines work." Together, they moved toward a nearby park, long abandoned and overtaken by rusting remnants of trees and dead vegetation. Lyra scanned the area carefully. Even here, the air was deadly, but she had memorized the safest paths. Ethan followed her lead, adjusting his suit with a grace she could not help but admire. "This is the site," she said, gesturing to a clearing surrounded by crumbling buildings. "It is isolated enough to minimize risk, but even here exposure for too long could be fatal." Ethan nodded. "Then we'll work quickly." For hours, they set up the first test machine. It was smaller than the final plan, but powerful enough to begin breaking down the toxins in a localized area. Ethan explained the mechanisms while Lyra adjusted the chemical calibrations. They worked silently, each movement precise and deliberate. The storm outside groaned and rattled the ruins, but they barely noticed, absorbed in the meticulous preparations. Finally, the machine hummed to life. It released a faint glow as it interacted with the poisonous air. Lyra held her breath, watching the readings spike and fluctuate. It was delicate, unstable, but there was a hint of success. The toxins were starting to break down, if only slightly. "Adjust the intake angle," Ethan suggested calmly, pointing to a panel. "It needs a better flow." The reaction isn't spreading evenly. Lyra followed his instructions, watching as the numbers steadied. Slowly, the readings became more consistent. A thin line of hope appeared in the middle of despair. "We're getting there," Ethan said. "If we can scale this up, we might just save the atmosphere." Lyra dared a smile. Maybe we can." But hope always comes with challenges. Just as they prepared to pack up for the day, a sudden tremor shook the ground. The storm outside surged violently, lightning striking the ruins near the park. Lyra and Ethan were thrown to the ground as dust and debris filled the air. Lyra's heart raced. She could feel the air burning her lungs through the suit. The city around them groaned under the stress of decades of neglect and acid storms. Yet Ethan rose, shielding the test machine with his body and adjusting controls mid-tumble. "Are you okay?" Lyra shouted, coughing. "I am," he replied, almost casually, though his movements were precise and urgent. "But the test machine, if it fails now, we lose everything." They worked together, crouched among debris, adjusting the equipment while the storm roared around them. Each movement was a delicate balance between survival and progress. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the air around the test site began to clear. The acidic particles broke apart, and the toxic compounds diminished, leaving a small patch of breathable space. Lyra exhaled through her suit's filter, feeling a surge of triumph. It worked," she whispered. Ethan's eyes met hers, steady and confident. "It worked because we worked together," he said. "Your knowledge, my equipment, neither of us could have done this alone." For the first time in years, Lyra allowed herself to hope. If a small area could be stabilized, then maybe the entire city, and even the planet, could be saved. She looked around at the ruins, at the dead trees and broken buildings, and imagined them thriving again. As they packed up, Lyra noticed a movement in the distance. Shadows flickered among the ruins, shapes that were not quite human. She tensed, scanning for danger. The government patrols had grown suspicious of outsiders, and the humans' presence might draw unwanted attention. But the figures stepped into the light, and Lyra recognized them as citizens, watching cautiously from a safe distance. Word of the strange human who dared to work with their scientist had spread quickly. Some were hopeful, some fearful, but all were curious. "They're watching," Lyra said softly. Ethan nodded. "Good. They need to see that it can be done. Hope spreads faster than fear when people see results." The next few days were a blur of work, calculations, and testing. The storm outside never relented, but inside the controlled test sites, small areas of the atmosphere began to improve. Lyra marveled at Ethan's ingenuity. He adapted on the fly, fixing errors she didn't even realize existed, and finding solutions to problems that had seemed impossible. But the work took a toll. Both of them were exhausted, their suits and equipment battered by constant exposure. Yet neither gave up. The stakes were too high, and failure meant the end of Violia as they knew it. One evening, as the storm finally subsided slightly, Lyra stepped outside the lab for a moment. She breathed carefully through her filter, letting the faintly cleaner air fill her lungs. She looked up at the greenish sky, still heavy with poison but no longer completely oppressive. A spark of something new stirred within her, a fragile but growing hope. Ethan joined her, his suit still pristine compared to hers. He looked out over the city, his eyes reflecting the faint glow of the machines they had activated. "It's a start," he said quietly. "Small, but a start." Lyra nodded. "It's more than I've seen in years." Her voice was tinged with relief. "For the first time, I can imagine a future where Violia survives." Ethan smiled faintly, placing a hand on one of the control panels. "We keep going," he said. "One step at a time, and soon what seems impossible now will be reality." Lyra glanced at him, studying the human who had dared to forge hope in a dying world. There was something about him, his fearlessness, his ability to see solutions where others saw only failure, that made her believe in the impossible. Perhaps humans were reckless, yes, but that recklessness was tempered by brilliance and determination. Perhaps that combination was exactly what Violia needed. That night, Lyra barely slept. She lay in her quarters, listening to the hum of the machines and the distant rumble of storms. Her mind replayed the day, the successes, and the near disasters. She thought about the citizens watching from the ruins, the people who might survive if the plan continued. And she thought about Ethan, the human who had changed the course of her world in a matter of days. For the first time in a long time, she did not feel despair. She felt purpose. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. The work of scaling the test machines to cover larger areas, of teaching others to manage the fragile systems, and of confronting the unpredictable challenges that Violia's dying atmosphere would throw at them. But for now, Lyra allowed herself a rare moment of peace. The storm still raged, the air still burned, but hope had found a foothold. The small test sites had proven the idea worked, but Lyra knew that saving Violia would require far more than isolated pockets of clean air. The city's ruins, the twisted towers, and the poisoned forests all needed to be stabilized. The problem was enormous, almost beyond comprehension. Yet, standing beside her, Ethan radiated the same calm determination that had carried them through the first experiments. "We need to scale this up," Lyra said, her voice steady despite the fatigue in her body. The air still burned through her suit, and her hands trembled from exhaustion. "Small tests are not enough. We have to stabilize entire districts, maybe the entire city." Ethan nodded, scanning the readings on his portable device. "I've been thinking about that. We can't rely on small machines anymore. We need something bigger, a central device capable of controlling the chemical balance of the air across wide areas. I call it an atmosphere forge." Lyra frowned. The idea sounded bold, almost reckless. "Forge? You mean a machine that can manipulate the atmosphere itself?" "Yes," Ethan replied. "It's ambitious but necessary. We'll use a combination of chemical catalysts, energy fields, and controlled dispersal systems. If we synchronize it properly, we can stabilize entire regions at once. But we'll need more materials, more power, and most importantly, your knowledge of Violia's unique atmosphere." Lyra swallowed hard. She had dreamed of something like this, but never dared to think it possible. And yet here was a human daring to call it feasible. "Where do we start?" Ethan gestured toward the old industrial district, a place of crumbling factories and abandoned power stations. Here. It's isolated but close enough to the city for us to monitor changes. If anything goes wrong, we can contain it. For the next several days, they scouted the area, mapping out locations for the forge's components. Lyra explained the chemical flows, the natural wind patterns, and the areas most vulnerable to acid storms. Ethan listened closely, absorbing every detail, often asking questions that made her think in new ways. Together, they drafted a blueprint, a massive, intricate plan that combined alien scientific precision with human ingenuity. The construction began cautiously. They started with small modules, assembling the first pieces of the forge in a covered warehouse. Ethan worked tirelessly, often improvising with materials scavenged from his ship or the ruins around them. Lyra marveled at his adaptability. Where she had seen limitations, he saw solutions. Where she had expected failure, he predicted success. Hours turned into days, and the forge slowly took shape. It was enormous, with towering spires of metal and glass, humming with energy as systems were tested and calibrated. Lyra sometimes feared it would collapse under its own weight, but Ethan remained calm, methodically checking each connection, each conduit, each circuit. "You're sure this will work?" Lyra asked one evening, wiping sweat and grime from her brow. Ethan looked at her, his expression serious. "Nothing is guaranteed, but if we don't try, Violia dies, and if we succeed, it changes everything, not just this city, but the planet. You and I, working together, can do what no one else has dared." Lyra nodded, inspired by his unwavering confidence. She had spent so long doubting herself, doubting the possibility of saving her world. But now, standing beside a human who refused to accept impossibility, she felt a flicker of courage she hadn't felt in years. As the modules were connected, the first real challenge emerged. The central energy core needed to power the forge was unstable. Any miscalculation could result in catastrophic failure. Lyra's hands shook as she adjusted the chemical regulators while Ethan worked on the energy alignment. Sparks flew, alarms blared, and for a terrifying moment, it seemed the forge might explode. But Ethan remained calm, directing Lyra with precise instructions. "Shift the regulator to 12%, not 10. Increase the stabilization field, trust me." Lyra hesitated, then followed his instructions. Slowly, the hum of the forge stabilized. The alarms ceased and the glowing panels pulsed steadily. She exhaled, relief washing over her. "It's alive," she whispered. Ethan smiled, his eyes reflecting the soft glow of the forge. "Alive and ready to fight for this planet." They worked tirelessly for weeks, often through storms and long nights. Every small success brought them closer, but also drew attention. Citizens had begun to watch from the ruins, curious and wary. Some were hopeful, others skeptical. Rumors spread through the city of the human and the scientist attempting the impossible. One morning, as Lyra inspected the chemical stabilizers, she noticed a group of government officials approaching the forge. Their expressions were stern, their steps deliberate. "They're coming to stop us," she said, fear tightening her chest. Ethan remained calm. "Then we show them results. Let them see that what we're doing is not dangerous, it's necessary." The officials arrived, questioning the pair, threatening to shut down the project. Lyra stood her ground, explaining the stakes, the science, and the consequences of inaction. Ethan demonstrated the minor stabilized zones they had already created, letting officials feel the slightly cleaner air for themselves. Slowly, doubt gave way to cautious curiosity. By the end of the day, the government officials left, deciding to observe rather than intervene. With the opposition temporarily eased, the real work resumed. They began scaling the forge modules, connecting power grids, and testing the dispersal of stabilized air across wider areas. The first few attempts were challenging. Some areas reacted unpredictably, the air fluctuating between slightly cleaner and dangerously unstable. Each failure taught them something new, refining their approach. One evening, as lightning lit the green sky, Ethan proposed a risky maneuver. "We can synchronize all the modules tonight," he said, eyes alight with determination. "It's dangerous, but it could create a stabilized area larger than anything we've attempted." Lyra hesitated, thinking of the consequences. A failure could destroy the forge, set back their work for months or worse. Yet watching the human beside her, so confident and unafraid, she felt a spark of trust. "Then we do it," she said. They worked through the night, coordinating the modules with precision. Sparks danced, alarms flared, and the storm outside intensified, but inside the forge hummed with controlled power. Slowly, the air began to shift. Toxic particles broke apart, replaced by breathable molecules. For a brief moment, a patch of sky above the industrial district glimmered with clarity, the first sign of real progress. Lyra gasped, her suit's sensors confirming the change. "It's working," she whispered. Ethan nodded, his expression calm but triumphant. "It's just the beginning. We can expand from here." Their success drew attention from the citizens, who gathered cautiously near the stabilized zones. They watched in awe as the first signs of life began to return. A small patch of green grass peeked through the ruins, the air clearer, and the first birds in years chirped weakly, exploring the new haven. Lyra felt a mixture of pride and disbelief. For the first time, she saw tangible proof that their efforts were not in vain. The forge, born from human ingenuity and alien knowledge, was creating life where there had been only death. But the challenges were far from over. The atmosphere of Violia was unpredictable, and storms could undo hours of work in minutes. The forge required constant attention, adjustment, and sometimes improvisation. Each day brought new tests of their skill and resolve. Yet through it all, Lyra noticed something remarkable about Ethan. He never wavered, never doubted, never gave in to fear. Even when failures occurred, he analyzed them calmly, learning and adapting. His resilience, his refusal to surrender to impossibility, was infectious. Lyra found herself thinking differently, trusting her instincts more, daring to take calculated risks she would have avoided before. One night, after another long day of work, they stood side by side on a high platform of the forge, looking out over the partially stabilized city. The storm clouds still loomed, but here and there, pockets of clearer air shimmered in the distance. "You know," Lyra said softly, "I never thought it could be done, not in my lifetime." Ethan shook his head, smiling faintly. "You didn't need to think it alone. That's the thing about humans, we try where others hesitate. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but we don't give up." Lyra nodded, feeling a surge of gratitude. "You've changed everything, not just with the forge, but with me. I see possibilities I didn't believe in before." Ethan glanced at her, eyes reflecting the glow of the machine. "We're just getting started. Violia is a challenge, but together we can meet it." As the night deepened, they continued monitoring the forge, adjusting chemical flows, and preparing for the next expansion. The humans' boldness and ingenuity had brought them this far, but Lyra knew the true test was yet to come, scaling the forge to cover the entire city and eventually the planet. She felt a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. The work was dangerous, the risks high, but the possibilities were greater than she had ever imagined. With a human by her side, daring to attempt the impossible, she dared to hope. And for the first time in years, the burning air of Violia did not feel like a sentence of death. It felt like a challenge, one that could be met, one that could be overcome. The storm raged outside, relentless and harsh, but within the walls of the forge, a small miracle was taking shape. Life, hope, and the promise of a future where humans and aliens could work together to save a dying world. Lyra exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the journey ahead, but also the promise of what they could achieve. She glanced at Ethan, the human who had dared to build the unthinkable, and felt a profound certainty. Together, they could change Violia forever. The next morning, the sky over Violia was darker than usual, thick clouds swirling in turbulent patterns. Lyra's sensors detected an increase in toxic gases, far beyond the usual levels. Her heart sank. The storm was intensifying, threatening to undo all the progress they had made with the forge. Ethan stood beside her, examining the readings on a holographic display. "The forge can handle fluctuations, but this spike is extreme," he said, frowning. "We need to act quickly or the system will fail." Lyra's fingers flew over the controls, adjusting chemical regulators and rerouting energy flows. The forge hummed loudly, its modules glowing as they pushed to stabilize the air. Outside, lightning cracked across the sky, the storm sending bursts of acidic rain smashing into the city. Debris flew in the wind, striking the fragile structures they had carefully set up. "We have to reinforce the dispersal field," Lyra said, her voice strained. "If we don't, the entire system could overload." Ethan nodded. "I'll handle the core adjustments. You manage the chemical balance. We synchronize every step." Together, they worked like a single unit, hands moving swiftly over the controls, eyes scanning monitors for fluctuations. Every decision mattered. A single miscalculation could destroy the forge, their work, and possibly the surrounding city. As they coordinated their efforts, Lyra noticed a sudden spike in the atmospheric readings. The corrosive gases were spreading faster than expected. She bit her lip, her mind racing. Ethan, the storm's accelerating. We need a plan B. Ethan's eyes narrowed, scanning the data. There is no plan B, we have only this. We adjust and compensate. Trust me. Lyra hesitated, then nodded. She had learned to trust him even when his methods seemed reckless. Together, they made rapid adjustments, rerouting energy and recalibrating chemical dispersal. Sparks flew from the consoles, and the forge groaned under the strain. Hours passed, and the storm outside worsened. Acid rain lashed at the city, lightning struck dangerously close, and high winds rattled the stabilizers. The forge worked overtime, its glow flickering as it struggled to maintain stability. Lyra felt her strength waning. Her lungs burned, even inside the suit, and her hands trembled from exhaustion. "Ethan, I can't keep up," she said, voice tight. "It's too much." "The system can't handle this." Ethan shook his head, his expression resolute. "We don't have a choice. If we stop, the atmosphere collapses again. Violia dies. We push forward, one step at a time." Lyra swallowed hard, taking a deep breath through her mask. She could feel fear clawing at her mind, the thought of failure pressing down like a weight. But she also felt determination, fueled by the human beside her who refused to surrender. She straightened her shoulders and returned to the controls. The forge's core began to overheat, and the alarms blared. Red lights flashed across the panels, warning of imminent failure. Lyra's fingers moved quickly, rerouting power to cooling systems while Ethan adjusted energy outputs. Sparks flew from the main console, striking the floor and sending small fires across the modules. "Keep it steady," Ethan shouted over the alarms. "We can do this." Lyra's heart raced as she synchronized the chemical regulators with the energy flow. The numbers fluctuated wildly, rising and falling with alarming speed. She could feel the forge trembling beneath her hands, a massive living machine straining against the storm's fury. A sudden blast of lightning struck nearby, shaking the building and sending debris flying toward the control panels. Lyra ducked instinctively, her suit taking the brunt of the impact. Sparks danced across the floor, and she felt the heat singe her gloves. Ethan grabbed a console just in time, preventing it from toppling. "Almost there," he yelled, adjusting the dispersal fields. "Hold the regulators, synchronize with me." Lyra focused, shutting out fear, pain, and exhaustion. Every sense was on the monitors, every movement precise. Slowly, the forge began to stabilize. The chemical reactions evened out and the energy flow synchronized. The hum of the machine became steady, powerful, and controlled. Outside, the storm began to weaken, the winds slowing and the acidic rain diminishing. A faint glow of clear sky appeared above the city, a small but unmistakable sign of success. Lyra exhaled sharply, leaning against the console as relief washed over her. Ethan's hand rested briefly on her shoulder. "See, we're stronger than the storm," he said quietly. "Together we can handle anything." Lyra nodded, though exhaustion made her legs feel like lead. She watched the sensors showing cleaner air spreading across the city, stabilizing pockets growing larger with each passing moment. Life, long dormant in Violia, was beginning to return. But even in this moment of triumph, danger was far from over. The storm had weakened, yes, but other threats lurked. Structural damage from years of neglect could collapse at any moment. The forge itself was pushed to its limits, fragile and vulnerable. Ethan adjusted a panel, checking energy reserves. "We've done well, but the forge isn't finished yet. This was only a test of its full capacity. Tomorrow, we expand further." Lyra nodded, still catching her breath. "I see that. We've won the first battle, but the war is not over." That evening, they walked through a stabilized district. The air was noticeably cleaner, and small plants were starting to sprout from the ruins. A few citizens ventured cautiously into the safe zones, marveling at the sudden change. Lyra felt a wave of pride and responsibility. This was not just science, it was hope. One of the citizens approached her hesitantly, a young girl with wide eyes. "Is it true?" she asked softly. "Can we really breathe again?" Lyra knelt slightly, speaking gently. "Yes, it is working. But it will take time and we must protect it. We all have a part to play." The girl smiled faintly, glancing at the glowing forge modules in the distance. Then we will try, we want to help. Lyra's heart swelled with hope. This was why she had never left Violia, why she had never given up. The people had faith, and now they had reason to believe. With humans like Ethan to guide them, perhaps their dying world could truly survive. The night brought little rest. Lyra and Ethan continued monitoring the forge, adjusting settings and ensuring stability. Even in moments of relative calm, the atmosphere remained unpredictable. Pockets of toxic air could flare unexpectedly, and the storm systems above the city could return at any moment. Yet through the endless work, Lyra noticed the human's unwavering focus. Ethan rarely paused, rarely doubted. His calmness in the face of danger, his confidence in finding solutions, inspired her. Where she had once hesitated, she now acted with determination, trusting both her own instincts and the human beside her. Days passed, and the forge expanded. The stabilized zones grew, spreading through the city and reaching the outskirts. Trees began to show signs of life again, birds returned to the cleared air, and the citizens cautiously started rebuilding. Lyra marveled at the transformation. The city was still in ruins, but for the first time in decades, it felt alive. Life was returning, slowly but steadily, fueled by the courage of two determined minds, one alien, one human, working together against impossible odds. One evening, as the sun struggled to break through the remaining clouds, Lyra and Ethan stood atop a platform of the forge, looking out over the city. The glow of stabilized zones spread below them, a patchwork of hope against the dying world. "You've changed everything," Lyra said softly. "I never thought it could be done, not in my lifetime." Ethan shook his head, smiling faintly. "It's not about me, it's about us. The people, the forge, and the will to keep going. We didn't give up, that's what matters." Lyra looked at him, realizing how much she had learned from this human. His courage, his ingenuity, and his refusal to surrender to impossibility. Perhaps that was the true lesson. Humanity's strength was not just in technology, but in the spirit that refused to quit, even when everything seemed lost. The night grew quiet, the storm clouds lingering but less threatening. The forge continued to hum, a steady heartbeat in a city that had almost given up on life. Lyra felt a deep sense of purpose. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now they had won a crucial victory. For the first time in years, she could imagine a future where Violia survived. And she knew, with a human beside her daring the impossible, that the impossible might just be possible after all. The dawn broke slowly over Violia, casting pale light through the lingering green haze. Lyra stood on the top platform of the forge, her eyes scanning the city below. Every street, every building, every shattered rooftop told a story of destruction and survival. But now there were signs of hope. Patches of stabilized air glowed faintly, and in some areas small plants pushed through the ruins, reaching for a sky that had once been deadly. Ethan joined her, his expression calm yet full of focus. "Today," he said quietly, "we complete the final phase. We expand the forge to cover the entire city. If this works, the atmosphere stabilizes completely." Lyra swallowed. The stakes had never been higher. Months of work, countless tests, and endless nights had led to this moment. The storm systems were still volatile, and the planet's chemistry was unpredictable. One wrong move could destroy the forge and set the atmosphere back to its most deadly state. "We've prepared as much as we can," Lyra said, tightening her gloves over the controls. "We just have to hope the systems hold." Ethan placed a hand briefly on her shoulder. "We don't hope, we act. That's what humans do, and you've been incredible, Lyra. Without you, none of this would be possible." Lyra felt a flicker of pride, but there was no time to dwell on it. She moved to her station, monitoring chemical flows while Ethan coordinated the energy cores. The forge thrummed beneath them, a massive humming structure of metal, glass, and technology that seemed almost alive. The expansion began slowly. Modules synchronized, dispersal fields activated, and the first waves of stabilized air moved outward from the central core. Sensors tracked changes in gas levels, wind currents, and chemical reactions. For a brief moment, it seemed to be working perfectly. But then, a sudden surge of energy in the storm above triggered a chain reaction. The stabilized zones flickered, shrinking back under the pressure of violent winds and heavy acid rain. Alarms blared across the forge as red lights flashed, warning of a system overload. "Lyra," Ethan shouted, "the energy field is fluctuating." We need to recalibrate or it will collapse. Lyra's hands moved quickly, adjusting the chemical regulators, trying to compensate for the sudden imbalance. Sparks flew from nearby consoles as the forge strained under the load. She felt heat and tension in every fiber of her body. One misstep, one delay, and everything they had worked for would be destroyed. Ethan was already at the core controls, his fingers dancing across the panels with precise movements. Shift the field by 5 degrees, reroute stabilization channels. Now. Lyra followed his instructions, synchronizing her adjustments with his. The numbers fluctuated dangerously, but slowly began to stabilize. The hum of the forge deepened, steady and powerful. The glowing zones expanded once more, pushing back against the storm. Outside, lightning struck closer than ever, splintering a ruined tower nearby. Debris flew across the streets, and the acidic rain hissed against their suits. Lyra and Ethan barely noticed, focused entirely on their work. "This is it," Lyra whispered. "Everything depends on this moment." Ethan glanced at her, eyes firm. "We've come too far to stop now. Trust the forge, trust yourself, trust me." Lyra took a deep breath, letting his words steady her racing heart. She adjusted the final regulators, aligning chemical flows with the energy cores. Slowly, the atmosphere began to respond. Toxic gases broke down at a faster rate than she had ever seen. The air shimmered faintly, and the sensors indicated rising oxygen levels and a decrease in acidity. The storm above did not relent, but its power was no longer absolute. The forge pushed outward, stabilizing larger and larger sections of the city. Lyra and Ethan worked tirelessly, synchronizing energy fields and chemical dispersal, monitoring every fluctuation. Hours passed, and gradually the stabilized zones merged. The green haze thinned, revealing glimpses of the city that had once been hidden. Birds, long absent from the skies, began to return, their wings cutting through the clearing air. Small plants, resilient and stubborn, pushed through cracked streets and ruined buildings. Lyra felt a surge of triumph, but she knew the work was not over. The final challenge remained, keeping the forge running long enough to fully stabilize the atmosphere. Every system, every core, every regulator was at maximum capacity. One failure could undo everything. Suddenly, a massive burst of wind struck the central core, sending a shockwave through the forge. Panels rattled, sparks flew, and an alarm blared that the energy field was near collapse. Lyra stumbled, barely maintaining her position. Ethan shouted over the alarms, his voice calm but urgent. "We stabilize together. Focus on the core channels, divert excess energy to the outer modules." Lyra acted immediately, rerouting power and adjusting chemical flows. The core trembled violently, but the forge held. Ethan followed her movements, coordinating adjustments with lightning precision. Slowly, the hum steadied. The alarms dimmed and the core pulsed steadily, glowing brighter than ever. Outside, the storm began to retreat. The acidic rain slowed, the wind diminished, and the sky cleared in patches. The air, once deadly, now carried a hint of freshness. Citizens cautiously emerged from their homes, marveling at the miracle unfolding above them. Lyra lowered her hands from the controls, exhaustion overwhelming her, but a smile formed on her lips. "We did it," she whispered. "It's working." Ethan stood beside her, equally tired, but his eyes reflected the glow of the forge and the city below. "We did more than survive," he said softly. "We saved Violia." For the first time, Lyra stepped outside without immediate fear. She inhaled carefully, letting the new air fill her lungs. It was still fragile, still imperfect, but it was breathable, real, clean air. Life, hope, and the promise of the future were no longer distant dreams. They were here, tangible and alive. The citizens began to gather in the newly stabilized zones, cheering and marveling at the miracle. Children ran through streets once coated in ash and acid, their laughter a sound Lyra had almost forgotten. Adults hugged, tears in their eyes as they breathed freely for the first time in years. Lyra looked at Ethan, realizing how much this human had changed everything. His courage, his ingenuity, and his determination had brought the unthinkable to life. Without him, she doubted Violia could have survived. "You've changed my world," she said quietly, almost to herself. Ethan shrugged, a faint smile on his face. "We changed it together. Humans are good at trying the impossible. And you made it possible." The forge continued to hum, steadily distributing stabilized air across the city. Lyra and Ethan monitored it through the night, ensuring that the systems remained active and balanced. Every fluctuation was corrected, every minor spike addressed. By dawn, the city was almost entirely stabilized. Lyra walked through the streets, marveling at the changes. Small plants pushed through cracks in the pavement, birds sang in the trees, and citizens moved freely, no longer constrained by fear of the poisoned atmosphere. She could feel a profound sense of accomplishment, but also responsibility. This new life would require care, vigilance, and continued effort. Ethan joined her, carrying a small toolkit for final adjustments. "The forge is strong," he said. "It can maintain the atmosphere if we keep monitoring, but the real work is in teaching others to manage it." Lyra nodded, understanding the truth of his words. Saving the planet was not a single act of brilliance. It was a sustained effort, a collaboration between humans and aliens, technology and knowledge, courage and hope. As they walked together, citizens approached them, thanking them, offering assistance, and expressing awe at the change they had wrought. Lyra realized that Vyrelia's survival was no longer hers alone. The city, the people, and even the planet itself were partners in this new chapter. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future. Schools could reopen, children could play freely, and the planet could slowly recover. Humans and aliens could work together, sharing knowledge, innovation, and determination. And it had all begun with a single human daring to forge the impossible. Lyra and Ethan stood on the highest platform of the forge, looking out over the city. The glow of stabilized air stretched across the ruins, a patchwork of hope and life. The storm clouds had retreated, leaving a sky that hinted at sunlight and warmth. "You did it," Lyra said softly. Ethan shook his head. "We did it together." Lyra smiled, feeling the weight of exhaustion and triumph in equal measure. She took a deep breath, savoring the clean air, and allowed herself to feel the full magnitude of their achievement. Vyrelia had survived. Life had returned. And for the first time in decades, the planet could breathe freely. The forge hummed steadily behind them, a reminder of what human ingenuity, determination, and collaboration could accomplish. Lyra knew that challenges would come again, that storms would return, and that the work of rebuilding would never truly end. But for now, the planet had been saved, and hope had been restored. And as she looked at Ethan, she realized that the impossible was no longer beyond reach. Humanity, with its boldness, creativity, and courage, had proven that even the most desperate worlds could be saved. For the first time, Lyra felt a certainty she had not known before. Vyrelia's future was bright, alive, and full of possibilities.